Welcome, everyone, to our last fireside chat of the school year. Can you believe the school year is almost over? It's been a great year for Young Investor Society. Today, I have with me Priya Prasad Bowe, Head of Sustainability at Oaktree Capital. That's going to be talking to you this evening, as well as Shayne Arcilla, Senior Analyst of Natural Resource Equities at Cohen and Steers. So we're going to go ahead and have Priya go first. And as always, if you have any questions, save it until after she's done speaking. We'll go ahead and ask you to unmute yourself and you can ask her your question. You can also type in the chat if your camera isn't working or if your microphone is off. No worries. You can go ahead and put that question in the chat and we will ask her. So let's go ahead and get started. Priya.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Really excited to be here. So I'm Priya Prasad Bowe. I am based in Los Angeles, but I'm from Minneapolis and lived in New York for a long time before moving out to Los Angeles about 6 years ago. I have always been working in financial services, but that was not what I expected to do, and certainly not what I expected to do when I was in high school. In high school, I thought I was going to go do neurosurgery. That is not what I'm doing right now. So I guess kind of rewinding a little bit, I was always a very determined student, and education was a big focus in my family. And I always had a plan. And not only was it like a 5-year plan or a 10-year plan, it was like a 15-year plan. Like, this is what I'm going to be doing 15 years out, which, like, in retrospect was about as long as I had been alive at that point. So it didn't, it was a little bit unrealistic, but I did not know that yet. I got to college and really was very singular in my focus on going into the research sciences. And by requirement of my school, I ended up taking classes that were outside of my major, and it really sparked an interest in me outside of the sciences. So I was fortunate enough to get a couple of internships that really changed the direction of what I was doing. And I loved the dynamism of the financial markets and the ability to work on a new project every day. And I ended up getting an internship at Morgan Stanley. So I was there for 8 years in a number of different roles. I was at Citadel Securities for 3 years as well, and then I came out to Oaktree Capital about 6 years ago, and I've had 2 different positions since then. So, like, comparing my original 15-year plan that was very linear, where I knew what the next thing was going to be, none of the roles that I've taken in my career have been things that I anticipated doing like 2 years before. So I think that is probably one of the most interesting parts of my career, for me at least, is that I never know what's coming next. And now I've really learned to embrace that rather than being kind of afraid of not being on a path and having a direction. So yeah, I think my perspective is that at every juncture when I've started to get maybe bored or feel like things are more predictable, that's when I start to really have a check-in with myself and understand, like, what do I like about my role, and what is it that I think would really motivate me? Like, what's the thing that I finish the day out with, and I call my husband, or early in my career, call my mom and said, I did this really cool thing today. And that's a really, that was for me a really important North Star to keep moving on a path that felt true to me, even though it wasn't a path that you could like read about on like an internet forum about what an investment banking analyst should do, or what a sales and trading analyst should do. So I really invite you all to think about what that thing is for you, especially so early in your life, early in your career. Like, things are really, the world is your oyster. Like, things are really open to you. You already have an interest in investments and financial literacy by being part of this group, which is so wonderful. But I would advise you to not get too focused on what other people think you should do, but really think about what is it that gets you out of bed in the morning, that gets you excited about your role. And for me, at every juncture, there was something I wanted to work on or do differently. I started my career as a trader, and it was very equities focused, which was fun for me, but I wanted to get a more macro world view. I graduated college in 2008, so it was a very turbulent time, and I wanted to get a good handle on the bigger things that were influencing our economy, interest rates, just the health of our economy, currencies, things like that. And I ended up moving into a seat that was more focused on those macro factors and still had a quantitative edge. After a couple years in that seat, which was a sales seat, I realized I wanted to focus more on sales. So, and really hone my skills in business development. So I moved to a role where it used a little bit of the quantitative knowledge I had and really leaned into business development and building out a platform and working on company strategy. And then when I came out to work at Oaktree, on a personal note, my husband and I had just gotten married. And about a month later, he was like, I have this really cool job opportunity, but it's across the country in Los Angeles. And I was like, why would I move to Los Angeles? We came out and visited, and I was like, I want to be here ASAP. Like, this place is amazing. And it took me about a year to find a new role. And it was a very like networking heavy experience. And I had to talk to people I knew, people who were friends of friends, people who were professional connections of friends, their parents, like anyone who could help get me closer to both understanding what I wanted to do and where I could do it. And that was a real exercise for me because there's nothing like having to explain to somebody else what you're really interested in to help you understand like what your true north is. I think people generally want to help curious, qualified people, and so I had a lot of luck along the way with the whole process. But also, I think what helped me was knowing that there were like two main types of roles I wanted to do, and so I was lucky enough to get a role at Oaktree where it was I really had to sell myself to say, this is not a type of role I've done before, and this isn't the asset class that I've worked in before, but I can do this because I've started over and learned things again. And I hope you'll take a bet on me. And they did take a bet on me, which was great. And then a couple years into that role, which had nothing to do with sustainability, by the way, sustainability was becoming an emerging topic that we really needed to get our arms around as a firm. And our co-founder asked me if I would do it. And I was really, really hesitant because I wasn't sure where it was going to go, but it's been a wonderful experience for me in building out something that didn't exist 4 years ago. So yeah, it's been a wonderful journey. I should also mention I did do business school while I was working, and I think there are pros and cons to doing that. I did the CFA, which is the investment credential that has helped me immensely, but also very challenging and time intensive. And I make a lot of time for my own hobbies, and I am a mother of three. And all those things are so important to me. And having time to myself, like having something that I'm really owning for myself at work is really important. Having something that's so fulfilling for myself, like my own personal hobbies outside of work, is important. My family's an incredible dimension to my life that in a way that I couldn't have imagined before. So I'm not saying you can have it all, but I think a lot of people can find a wonderful balance. And I didn't see that reflected when I was in high school. I felt like finance and investments were really a man's world. And it was a place where you couldn't be a working mom and have a fulfilling home and professional life. But I do think, especially, I see that a lot at my firm, and I do see it a lot in many, many companies represented much more now than maybe 15, 20 years ago. So yeah, I feel like I've monologued for a long time, so I'm happy to pause there and take any questions.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Priya. Gretchen.
Okay, I have actually quite a few questions. Sorry about that. But I'm kind of interested. You said that you in college weren't in finance and were in a separate major, and then taking classes became interested. So I'm kind of curious what those classes were and then what the trajectory looked like after that.
Yeah, so I was originally a neurobiology major, and I had worked in a in a lab for a number of years when I was in high school. This is when I was living in New York City. And a couple things happened. One, the project that I'd been working on for 4 years at this lab, it turned out that the rats that we had used for the control and the rats that we had used for the variable were not the same kind of rats. So all the things that we worked on for 4 years were like out the door. So that was really frustrating and gave me a good line of sight into the fact that like that was a very long-term project that I was very passionate about. It had to do with Alzheimer's and estrogen therapy, and it was really personally meaningful to me. But I couldn't live like that to work on a project that long. And also, it's a very tough life. You live grant to grant, and especially in today's environment, it's very hard to think about. But the other thing that was in the back of my mind was financial stability. So my parents are immigrants, and they were very adamant that there was no safety net. Like we should operate as if there were no safety net. So they paid for my college, which was an amazing, like phenomenal boost and gift. And after that, they said, we're not going to pay for grad school. You need to do everything on your own. So after that happened with my lab, I was like thinking more about the people who ran my lab, and their husbands were both hedge fund managers. So I was like, what's that about? Like what is that? Is that interesting? Should I do that? And I had taken economics classes, and I didn't like them very much because they didn't seem to represent the real world. But the more I looked into finance and behavioral economics, the more I felt that that represented a world that was recognizable to me, and that felt like a real science, where a lot of the economic social science type work that I had done was taking theory and then applying it to a world that didn't really look a lot like that theory. But more traditional science, I think, is often the reverse. You take the real world and then you fit your theory to the real world, and that's what finance felt more like to me. So I think behavioral economics is super interesting. I took a class called political psychology that is still incredibly influential. I think at the end of the day, there is no rational man, which is the concept you learn about in economics, that everyone behaves like perfectly rationally and according to certain rules, but those people don't really exist in the real world.
Hearing you say behavioral economics, really, that is my favorite thing. That is my interest by far. That's what I want to do in college. So hearing you mention that is actually really nice to hear. So would you say that you find that actually relevant in what you do now? Like, do you use that and do you apply that to your role now?
Yeah, absolutely. I think looking at the behavior of financial markets, behavioral economics is really helpful because not everything that gets integrated into market pricing is purely rational or information based. There are a lot of reasons that people trade and invest differently. And then my job right now is, even though it's sustainability focused, it has a lot to do with corporate strategy. And I think when you're trying to influence people within a company, you also do have to think about psychological biases or behavioral biases that influence how people make decisions. And so I do find it really, really useful.
I'm so sorry, but I have one more question. I heard you mention like you're a mom of three and working, and something that's always been important to me to think about is like I've always thought about my future and I want to have a family at some point, but the idea of like managing work but also being a mom, like that's always seemed really difficult to me. So I'm just curious like how you've navigated that. And you said you've had positive experiences. So I'm just kind of curious your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think I really pushed it really hard before I had kids, and that worked for me. And I'm happy that I did it that way, but I don't think that's the only way to do it. And then I think just for me personally, like they've really added a whole other dimension to my life that I also bring back to work. So being a parent for me means I can't do everything perfectly. I have to accept that some things are going to fall through the cracks, and that's usually not my default behavior. My behavior is everything's done like to my standard all the time, and that just doesn't work with little creatures who have their own mentality. So I think like I am not working in exactly the same way that I did before, but that is not necessarily a bad thing or a loss. It's just a different thing for me. So I think early on, I was involved with some initiatives at Morgan Stanley because we were noticing that junior women were kind of self-selecting themselves out of the work environment well before they were planning to have kids, just because they wanted to be in part established before they started their families. And it felt like it was preemptive almost. And I think it had a little bit to do with role models and like lack of role models in the workplace. So that was something I've been thinking about for a while. And I don't think there's a wrong way to do it. But I think if you, maybe it sounds a little woo-woo, but if you kind of trust your instinct about what's important to you at any given point in time, I think you can try to find the balance that works for you.
Great, thank you so much, Priya. If you guys have, anyone else has a question for Priya, please raise your hand so I can go ahead and call on you. Isaac.
Yeah, hi, Priya. It was really great hearing you talk. I'm just curious because I find myself sort of in a similar situation to you, but just because of the fact that you were sort of pursuing more of a technical side in your sort of the research aspect. And I was just wondering, are there any sort of those skills that you still find yourself from your previous research background applying today in your career in finance?
Yeah, I think just the framework of thinking around sciences and like how do you come to a rigorous conclusion, what's a level of certainty that you're comfortable with or uncomfortable with. You know, you might have everything like mapped out of like this is my investment thesis and how things are going to work out, but there are always variables that get thrown in there. And I think having that framework around how to judge like whether you let me put it a different way. The quality of the decision you make isn't always dictated by the outcome of your process. So if I have a really great decision-making framework, there's still a chance that things don't work out in my favor. And I think having that idea, having that ability to structure your thoughts around like decision-making and outcomes, and structuring your thoughts around like, does that mean like if things didn't fall my way, if it wasn't a good investment, does that mean that I made a bad decision? Maybe, maybe not. I think like that kind of framework is really helpful in the finance context, and I think in life in general. So I think that analytical framework, you find a lot of people who have more quantitative backgrounds in finance, because I think it can be quite helpful, although it's not the only way to get in the business, and it's not the only set of skills that's highly useful in this world.
Thank you.
Great. Anyone else have one last question for Priya before we move on? Everyone good? All right. Thank you so much, Priya. You're welcome to stay until the end, just in case anyone else has any other questions, but you're welcome either way.
Great, thank you.
Thank you so much, Priya. It was great having you.
Yeah,
I'm now introducing Shayne Arcilla. Shayne is a senior analyst, natural resource equities at Cohen and Steers. So go ahead and take it away, Shayne.
Okay, so I'm not very good at talking without being prompted. So, you know, feel free to prompt questions as I go, but I guess I'll start from the beginning. So I'm at Cohen Steers. I'm the natural resource equities analyst here. Our fund strategy is split between 3 analysts who cover metals and mining, energy, and then the food value chain, and that's the sleeve that I cover. Very dynamic, very volatile, lots of things going on. So I guess I'll just backtrack, kind of talk you through how I got into the industry. So I actually, so I was born in the Philippines. I left when I was 8, and then my family and I moved to Vienna, Austria, where I went to I would stay there until I was in middle school, and then went to high school here. Most of my childhood, or at least until I went to college, I was basically set up to do the sciences, right? So my dad is a computer scientist, and it's always been kind of understood that I was going to do something in the sciences. And I think for a long time, I thought it was computer science, programming, all that stuff. I thought about medicine, becoming a doctor, until I did one summer volunteer work at a hospital nearby, and I hated the smell and I couldn't stand it. So medicine was out. Also, I just don't like being around sick people. Anyway, And then I did a couple of things during my high school years where that it was STEM related, and I did do a couple of coding, like early AI type of stuff during the summer. And I think for me, what I realized in that experience is that I'm not a lab person. Um, Maybe it's just because my experience was that I was basically stuck in labs with no windows, and I just couldn't stand that. And then I started looking around my peers, and some of them were interested in business. A friend of mine was interested in stocks and investing, and they just seemed to have a much more fun social time. And so I'm like, huh, maybe I'll explore that. In any case, when I applied to college, it was either I applied to two tracks. One was computer science track, and the other one was finance. Not really knowing anything about finance. Like, the most my family ever taught me about money was how to save and budget. There was nothing about, or maybe like buying property, and there was nothing about stocks. There was nothing about bonds. Like, we understood FX rates because we traveled, and so had to understand converting money from one place to another, but there was nothing about playing that game. And so anyway, I applied to finance just kind of as a rebellion, I guess, against my science background. So I got into the schools that I wanted for both tracks. And I think the one that I would have done for computer science, I just didn't like the campus when I visited it. So I ended up going to Penn State for finance. So in a way, like, my entire career and I guess life up to this point has been kind of very non-linear, like very um, kind of circumstantial. So then I went to Penn State for finance, and I wasn't necessarily in love with it. I thought it was pretty easy, so I might have taken a bunch of naps in some classes. I know I'm sounding like a bad role model right now, but I did take a lot of classes that just interested me, because I was kind of done with the idea of, okay, like, I was a very strong student. I got straight A's up until high school, and I guess when I went into college, my mindset was, I don't care about getting straight A's. I care about feeding my curiosity, and so I took French, German. I took like hard chemistry classes. I took calculus. I took a bunch of classes that were just interesting. And then I kind of fell in love with art history. So I took a minor in that. Um, and it was just feeding my curiosity and just like expanding my mind. And I figured that's what college is for. Yes, I did do well. Like, I did generally well. And but in any case, that wasn't what I aimed for. Like, I didn't care to get straight A's. Like, I know people who get straight A's, and it's like big whoop, like you took easy classes just to get straight A's. I mean, I know some people like take difficult chat. Anyway, I think college should be a time for you to explore and to challenge yourself and see how far you can go and find out what you actually really care and love. Um, and then so yeah, so that was college, and I graduated with a finance degree. I thought about traveling for a year because I have friends all over the world. I figured, hey, I'll crash on somebody's couch for like a year before I started getting a job. But so it happens, like, I got a job right out of college. That was actually by accident because I had applied to a position after reading a job description from Citigroup about equity research, and then I met the Prudential HR person at the career fair, and I just thought they were the same person. Anyway, I started telling her about the job description. She's like, "That's interesting. Why don't you just send me your resume?" She had no idea. Anyway, so I sent her my resume, and I get an interview, and I think I my my first boss will tell you to this day the reason he hired me was because when he asked me what my plan was for the next 5 years, I said, I have no idea. I might get hit by a bus when I walk out of here. And so he hired me the next day. So I did that. So I got in that way. So my first job was Prudential Real Estate Investors. That was I did 2 years working for the econ team there, where we basically analyze markets. Like, if we so the fund, it's kind of like a private equity shop, and then so we would partner up with a developer, and then let's say the developer wanted to build a office building in Chicago, and so my team was basically tasked with, okay, let's look at the macroeconomics of, or the economics situation in Chicago, and project that out and see if this deal makes sense. And I thought that was a great way, like high level way, to kind of introduce myself into the investing world. And we published 2 papers as a result of that, kind of giving like a long-term big picture view of the trends that we think would affect the real estate market going forward in the next 10 years. So I did that for 2 years. I got bored after 2 years, and I figured this is not necessarily the career I want to do. I don't want to do economic research for the rest of my life, and I wanted to get some deal experience because I was watching the guys next to me who were in the transactions like deal team. They were actually underwriting the projects that that the fund managers were partnering up with the developers, and I thought that was interesting. So I got into a small private equity firm in Connecticut. They did pretty much just that, but more on the debt side. And so I did that for 2 years because the great financial crisis happened. That was fun. There was a lot of blood in the streets, figuratively speaking. And then, so it was just kind of like a really rough period. And then after that, it was kind of like, all right, I'll go to grad school. But I didn't do an MBA, I did international relations. I think part of it is because it was the GFC, it was 2000. It was like, so GFC happened 2008. I was at that PE shop until 2010. Everybody and their grandmother was applying for MBAs. So, so it was just like, all right, never mind this. And I figured I had a more competitive edge going into like something else besides an MBA. And in my thinking was, I already did finance undergrad. I have financial experience, of real world experience. It didn't make sense for me to spend 100 grand for the next 2 years to do the same thing. And so I wanted to do something else, and I kind of miss the international school experience that I had. And I figured, you know what? I don't know anything about geopolitics or politics in general. And coming from the Philippines and living in 2 developed economies, I think part of my something I was kind of just interested in, all right, how is it that some countries succeed and some countries don't? And so I found a program at the Fletcher School of the Fletcher School of, whoa, what is it? The Fletcher School at Tufts University. Sorry, brain fart. And so it's historically been a feeder school to the State Department. But my vision was I was going to marry my financial experience, my finance, investment, business experience, and figure out how to tie that into economic development. And so that's what I did while I was in grad school. And so I thought I was going to do NGOs like World Bank and stuff. And I did a couple of interviews, and then I figured, no, never mind that. So I just kind of made a lot of like decisions. Like I come to a fork of the road and make I make decisions based on, I guess, the circumstance of the time. I think one time I got an internship offer at the Economic Bureau it was like part of the State Department, but it was like their economic division. And then I had asked, okay, is this position paid? And they said no. And I said, no, thank you. Because I just can't afford to like live somewhere like in DC and not get paid. Anyway, so then I graduated from grad school. A friend of mine who works with me in my first job actually like just called me up and said, hey, there's this job at ISI. It was called ISI at that time. Then it got bought by Evercore. It was an equity research position for their consumer retail team. And at the time that I was applying and the time I was there, it was the top ranked consumer retail team for equity research on the street. Like it was II rank. And I said, I know nothing about stocks. I've never thought of myself as an investor in that regard. Why would they even hire me? He said, they just needed someone who knows Excel really well, and you know Excel really well. So just give me your resume. And so I gave him a resume. I interviewed with the team. Rest is history. So I spent 7 years at ISI, eventually Evercore ISI. I felt like that was kind of the time I really learned about how to analyze companies and and stocks. But I would say I didn't really internalize those lessons until I started playing with my own portfolio, like my actual real money, not paper money, but real money. And I started applying like the things I learned and put it into my own, I basically put my money where my mouth is. And I actually did pretty well. And I think as a result of that, I got pretty confident and realized that this is the kind of thing I ultimately want to do until I die. um, it's like because I think for me, you know, like I hear people talk about like their plans and their true north, and so Priya mentioned her true north, and so I guess my true north was always um, I needed to find something that I would wake up for every morning that I loved doing, right? Like I know people say like find your passion and all that stuff, but I think like you don't necessarily find your passion until you get up and actually do things and experience things and you figure out what it is that you like and you don't like. And then when you finally find it, it's kind of like, okay, this is it. This is what I'm gonna do. I'm never gonna retire. I will do this until I can't do it anymore because I don't believe in retirement. That's another story. And so yeah, so after that, so I was in the sell side equity research team for 7 years, and I wanted to jump over to the buy side, which is where I am right now. But it didn't happen. It didn't happen right away. It took like I think I might have spent like 5 years interviewing and looking for a buy side job until I finally landed this one. So in the interim, I met someone who was part of a startup consulting firm. It was restructuring consulting, and they just needed bodies, right? They needed people who can analyze and have a background that was kind of conducive for what they were doing, and said, you know what, I'm going to try this out. It's an interesting experience. I've never consulted before. I've never like actually tried to walk a private company through something, and so I did that. Um, I did that for 5 months because I absolutely hated it. But yeah, it was restructuring consulting, but I hated that experience mainly because I had absolutely zero control over my time, and I realized that for me, I need to have a say, like control over my time, like not be penalized to just even go to the bathroom, for example, which happened. And yeah, so but what I did realize from that job was I was always kind of curious about corporate banking, law, investment banking, consulting, and then managing a team and being in operations. That job basically crossed off all of those career paths for me, and I realized like, yeah, I don't like any of that. I'm not going to pursue that, and it really like solidified the fact that I love investing and this is what I want to do, and this is what I want to spend my time doing for as long as I could do it. And so luckily I got this job. Like I literally found a job on LinkedIn, and I did some sleuthing and found my PM's email, and I just sent him an email cold and said, hey, I've been investing in my own for 5 years. I have all this experience in equity research. I haven't covered this particular sector directly, but I have tangential experience. Basically just really made a strong case. And then he called me and I interviewed, and the rest is history. And he told me last time I met him, because he left the firm after like 2 years I was here. He said, yeah, so like when I got your email, I remember thinking, you're scrappy. I like scrappy. So he called me in. Anyway, so that's how I got to where I am. I'm sorry, I'm not as like eloquent or, straightforward, but that's my career and that's my life. I'll end there.
Great, thank you so much, Shayne. Just personally, I love your story. I love
thank you.
that there was a bunch of different things that came up, things that you decided that you didn't like at the time, and then you were able to pivot and go to something else. Love that story. Let's open it up. Let's see, anyone want to raise their hands and have a question for Shayne? Gretchen.
Thank you.
Okay.
I was going to ask, so I had two questions that I can kind of blend together to some extent. I was going to say, how does your background in living in various places kind of influence your life and work now? How would you say that influences your experience and worldview? And then another one, which is kind of similar, I would say, how does your broad curiosity and then also your knowledge in various fields help you in your work now? Because I know you mentioned you
Sure.
took many
Yeah.
different classes in college.
Sure. So what I come to realize about myself over the years is that um, I'm someone who really likes and thrives in a situation where I could study something and then move on to another subject, which is probably why I didn't like being in scientific research so much. Because like my experience in that field was like I did one summer where I was studying, I was with it was like a cancer research team at Stony Brook University. And I was staring, like I basically spent the summer looking at the microscope at like a bunch of like petri dishes and slides, and I just realized like, okay, I could spend 10 years doing this and never get an answer. And that to me was just like, I can't do that. I can't do that to myself. Kudos to everybody else who could do that. But yeah, I'm a curious person. I like learning about a lot of things, um, enough to be dangerous. And then there would usually be a time where I'm kind of like, all right, I've satisfied myself there and I'll move on. And so, and I think part of that has been influenced by the fact that I lived in different countries and met so many people. And, it's just kind of this whole, the world's such a big place. There's so much stuff, like I want all of it, like, and so what I love about my job is that it gives me that without having to really leave my desk. You know what I mean? Like, so with I will say, like, when I was covering consumer retail, so when you're on the sell side of equity research, so I do equity research, but on the buy side, right? So on the sell side, typically what happens is that your world is kind of small. Like you're focused on like 10 names, maybe 20 names, and you could do that for decades, right? And you just become like a very deep expert kind of thing. And those people are very important, and like I lean on them heavily like sometimes. Um, and that's fine. Like if you like doing that, then that's great. And you form a lot of really deep relationships. But on the buy side, so when I got this job, the description said agribusiness consumer staples. I had done consumer retail, right? So retail, like that would be like Home Depot, and I had also done soft lines, which is like fashion brands, completely unrelated to what I'm doing right now. But coming into this seat, I thought it was a pretty narrow focus coverage. Like I thought I would just be covering grains and like the upstream food guys. But then what ended up happening, like, so I joined this team 2019. So in that 5-ish years, I have covered grains, food, like up like the protein guys, like the Tyson Foods of the world, ingredients that gets me into chemicals, biofuels, renewable diesel, like renewable fuels. I started like looking into um, like environmental policy, that like how that affected some of my stocks, industrials, like, so like John Deere, like what does that do? And then I got into like some of the what I call the processing type of industry. So what the job description kind of didn't really capture was that it's not so much that you're covering agribusiness and consumer staples. What you're ultimately covering is the food's value chain, and it is huge, right? And it's not, and then you're focusing on food, but there's so many things that's like tangential to it. So for example, like industrial. So then you start thinking about steel prices, right? Then you start thinking about like, okay, energy prices like oil. Um, Obviously there's an analyst who's dedicated to that, but you think about that. Then you start thinking about like, okay, when I was in the sell side, I always thought about consumer spending, and that's all I thought. But then here it's like I think about the consumer, then I start thinking about, okay, what's the Fed going to do, and what does that mean in terms of like the interest rate, and what does that mean in terms of like consumer spending? What does that mean in terms of the FX? And then you start thinking about like, oh, then how does that affect my Brazilian protein guys who are exporting things, right? And then you start talking tariffs and all of these things. So it's for me, like for some people, it can be very overwhelming, but for me, I love that. And I think what I've come to realize about myself too is that I have very strong pattern recognition. So like I could take two like seemingly like uncorrelated or unrelated topics and then figure out the connection. Like how does the price of corn affect the margins for Coca-Cola, right? And I'll tell you why. It's like sweeteners, high fructose corn syrup, and then the guys who like sell that stuff. So it's like these things that to me is just like like, and I made it. I said earlier, like I don't believe in retirement. I think that's like a trap. Like I don't believe in this idea of spending 40 years of your life doing something that you don't love and then waiting until you're like 60, 65 to finally do something that you love. Like the most successful and richest people I know are still working well into their 90s, you know? So like Lady Gaga doesn't stop doing what she does just because she's worth like $500 million, or even Taylor Swift, right? So it's like things like that. It's like, I think that's just so important. And like, and I guess the way I thought about it was, if I'm 90 years old, what would I be doing? And then work backwards. So I don't know if that answers your question. Yeah.
Great, thanks so much, Shayne. Anyone else have a question for Shayne? Isaac.
Hi. So initially I had a like very similar question to what Gretchen was gonna ask, but just in the line of, like unconventional paths and on nonlinear paths, you mentioned like a lot of decisions that you made throughout your life, whether it's like studying different courses in college, like potentially taking a gap year, studying international relations. Were there any moments in your career that like you had like second doubts by yourself, like, oh, maybe this isn't the right path, or oh, maybe I'm not doing the right thing, and how did you address that?
Like every time.
Yeah.
Yeah, like every single time. Except maybe when I got this job. Because when I got this job, I had I knew, I've gone through so much already and I've experienced enough that and I think what really helped was that horrible, what I will now call the summer job, but it wasn't a summer job. It was 5 months. It was during the summer period. And I think that job, as much as I hated it, it made me realize what I did not like. And it was basically 5 career paths. And it just kind of help me focus. I think for much of, because I have a lot of interests and I like experiencing a lot of things growing up, it was kind of hard for me to just be like, oh, in the next 10 years, this is my plan and this is what I'm going to do, And for me, it was just kind of like, I'm going to go. And also, I didn't go to an Ivy League school, right? I feel like a lot of my friends and colleagues who went to Ivy League schools, that was kind of how they were. Like they had this 5-10 year plan. And it was like for some of them it worked, for some of them like kind of thing. But I feel like a lot of people I know lacked was just kind of this introspection, like, what do you care about, like, why are you doing this just to like wait until you're 65 to quote unquote retire from the industry and then do what you want to do? Like, why don't you do that now, or at least get closer, or take a step to get closer to what it is you want to do. So I think for me it was because, like, when I, like my friend, for example, like she's like this classic Harvard person, and like when she talks about her career path, it's kind of like, oh, like, it was kind of laid out and it was how it played out as she had planned. And I didn't get that, like I didn't have that opportunity. For me, it was just kind of like white knuckling it and trying to figure it out as I go. And I would say I got lucky a lot. I formed really good friendships that introduced me to things. And I will say I try to get out of finance like maybe 5 times in my 20s, which is like 5 years ago. No. But in any case, but yeah, I try to get out of it because, like, I think I would say the first 10 years of my career, and I think when I talk to like PMs and like people in my, like women in my level, like everyone almost all of them will tell you they had a massive like inferiority complex, or like they don't like this imposter syndrome, and some of them still feel it. And I'm like, are you kidding me? You're a PM. Like, how can you feel like you clearly have skills, and you're a mother, like I have a 4-year-old boy, and I would never sacrifice the time I have with him for more money kind of thing. Like he's just too cute. I can't. um, so but yeah, like I think I lost my train of thought. But did I answer your question?
Yeah,
Okay.
that was like it was like really insightful. I just had one more question, just along the
Okay.
line of, having like a lot of interest. I think I'm sort of similar in the way that, like sort of jack of all trades rather than like specializing in one particular thing. So how do you really like wield those skills, or how do you find that one niche to dig down into as your career? Because as like it's kind of hard to find a career where you can interweave multiple different hobbies and interests. So how do you like find that balance?
Yeah. So you're what? You're in high school, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So you would be very lucky if you are able to do that when you get into college, or even after you graduate from
Mhm.
college. I would say it'll probably be like 10 years before you find it. And, so it's kind of like, for me, it was like, okay, I know I had a lot of interests. I didn't come from a family who understood investing. They're so far removed from Wall Street, it's not even funny. Like I didn't know people. Like it was just so it was just kind of like, okay, I graduated from college, my parents paid for it, thank you, but then I was on my own. So it was like a bunch of decisions that I had to make to survive, right? So like I have to pay bills. And then so I took a job that was relatively interesting and kind of, you know, connected with what I studied, and I could use the skills that I had to do that job. I did that for a number of time. It paid my bills. And after some time, I realized, you know what? I like this part of it. I don't like this part of it. I want to know more about this other part. And then I start looking for the next thing that would kind of satisfy that curiosity. And then I kept doing that, right? And obviously I had to pay my bills. So, but and I like nice things. So, and so I think it's very much about like you know I there's this really good book, and I forget the title of it, but it talked about people like Tiger Woods who specialized when they were 2 years old, and that's all they did their lives and the success that they have, versus people who just kind of did a random walk and like explored and discovered what they did and came to that specialization pretty like later on in life, and how that came out pretty well too. And so I think that's really all it is. I think you know you you're young, you spend the next couple years just kind of, I think it's very important to like study the things you're interested in, study the things that could help make you money, so that you can survive, and then just kind of one foot in front of the other kind of thing. The best advice I got was actually from my cousin, who said your job should do one of two things, if not both: make you money so that eventually that you could do your own thing, or give you the skills so that you could eventually do your own thing. So ultimately, it's all about like oh, all right, can you hear me? So it's ultimately about kind of like this idea of going down a path where you could become the boss of something, you could like be the leader of something, or you could become like independent and do your own thing, right? So you need time, you need money and skills. So you just need to figure out how to get one of those, if not both. So,
Thank you.
and I'll probably change my advice in 5 years, but that's what
Perfect.
it is for now.
Alex, you have a question?
Yeah, hi. Given your experience in equity research, what key indicators do you prioritize when evaluating potential investment opportunities? Like, for example, do you focus primarily on fundamental metrics like PE ratios, or do you place like greater emphasis on qualitative aspects like management strength and comparative advantage?
Um, so I will say the valuation metrics like the PE ratios is probably the last thing I look at. Although like once I have like my screen, that's kind of the thing that I look at to look for opportunities. Like if something looks really cheap or really expensive, then it's like, okay, what's going on there? But for the most part, I would say I'm pretty bottoms up in my analysis. So I like to dig deep into the companies and sectors that I cover. I like to understand what makes them tick. Kind of like I like to understand what makes people tick, right? Because once you understand what makes them tick, like and usually it's like their competitive advantage, what are their sales and profit drivers. Those are really the three things that I really spend a lot of time understanding, because like the strength of the management team is great, but then it's like that team could go away, you know. And so I don't spend, like Warren Buffett said it. He said um like a good management team, like eventually like a company will, there will be a time where a company eventually gets run by an idiot. Right? So like, yes, you care about the management team, but like I think more about the competitive, like what my former boss would call like the mousetrap model. Like is this the better mousetrap relative to its peers? Yeah, so it's like the business model, competitive advantage, and then understanding the sales and profit drivers. So really it's like how will this company grow their earnings and cash flow? And then you look at their valuation metrics and then compare it to the rest of their peers and see if it makes sense.
I feel like my entire life I've been like exposed to mostly business. So now that I'm like a junior and going into college soon, like I feel like I don't really know exactly what kind of major to go into because I just feel like I haven't really explored
Uh-oh, we lost you.
all of like the different different career paths. And so yeah, that's kind of my question.
What should you do with your life?
Yes.
Like at 18, what should you do with your life? Uh,
Yeah.
yeah, so it's kind of very much the same way. Like I was, you know, like family of immigrants 3 times over or twice over, in country, like first time was a country we didn't speak the language of. And but yeah, it's like, yeah, it's like I'm sure your parents were like, oh, you know, you can be anything you want as long as it's doctor, engineer, or lawyer, right? Kind of thing. Um, but I think, like I think, you know, the way I approached it was, okay, I know I'm strong in the sciences, I'm strong in STEM, I'm not great in history. Now I kind of am, because I kind of had to learn it. And, you know, like there are things that I picked up on the way because I kind of had to as a function of my job. But like at your age, yeah, so it's like I've been kind of formed a certain way. I knew I had these curiosities about things outside that I've never had experience, much less the connections. Like I remember, like as a kid, I told my dad I'd like to be a writer, and he said, "We don't know anybody in that industry, so you're going to the sciences." I'm like, okay, you know. So, um, but I think maybe like, I guess one way that would probably help is that you lean into what you're already strong at, and while you're in college, just take as many classes as you can that just interests you. Like, don't care about the grade, right? Like, if you want to study Italian, and then, you know, but then have your like core study, like your core discipline, that your what I call your money making discipline, and then your fun stuff around that. Like, that's kind of how I approached it. I mean, I graduated college in 3 years because I had 1 quarter worth of like AP credits, and then I just ended up taking a lot of courses each semester, simply because I was like interested in it. I mean, part of the reason why I kind of took art history as a minor was because it killed like 3 requirements in one. So that kind of helped me graduate early. And also my final semester, I really got into video games. So I spent like 100 hours. But then, so I kind of used that to kind of like make it so that, okay, I'll spend 2 hours every day playing this video game. And so that I can like, you know, incentivize my brain to really hyper focus on calculus the next 2 hours. And I did that a lot, you know. So, but yeah, like I said, like, you know, you have your money making kind of discipline, and then like explore around it and not care about the grade so much. And then you'll figure out, and then, you know, spend the next 10 years having a lot of existential crises and exploring and stuff, and don't do any bad things, but you know what I'm saying. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Priya and Shayne. I thank you so much for being here. I love both of your stories. I love hearing kind of the trials and tribulations of how, you know, nothing is perfect. So I really want all of our students to know that it's okay. It's okay to just go to school and learn all of the different things and be able to kind of make that path and find that path instead of having, you know, a predestined plan and then maybe that plan not working out. I love the advice, Shayne and Priya, about being able to just be flexible and pivot when something's not going right. So thank you so much for all of that advice. It was wonderful having you guys here, and thank you so much for coming tonight.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
A good one.
Bye. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.